So welcome everyone. Hi, my name is Marc Muhlenbach, and together with Julia Haitzmann, we are hosting the Millionaire Marketing Freelancer series, maximizing your core talent, become financially free, and live an adventurous life. We're hosting this online summit for freelancers that are just getting out of the gates or thinking of doing so and want to know how to best get going, what pitfalls to avoid, and how to become more successful more quickly, but also for freelancers looking to level up and take the next step towards greater financial independence. Today, we have someone really badass with us, might I say, a veritable rock star of the field. Julie Cortez is with us. We're very excited to have her. An award-winning advertising marketing copywriter, Julie Cortez has run her own freelance business for more than 20 years. Best known as the founder of the Freelance Exchange, Cortez has created her own much-needed college-level course, Freelancing 101, and teaches as an adjunct professor at the world-renowned KC Art Institute. Recognized with awards dozens of times over for her work, leadership, volunteerism, and community involvement, this freelance rockstar is regularly sought out for media interviews, public speaking, and professional coaching for freelancers, as well as those who hire them. Cortez is loving life, living out her passion, and helping others succeed. Julie, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the summit. And Julia, let's rock and roll.
Yes.
Awesome.
Hi, Julie. So great to have you today.
Thanks so much for having me.
The first thing I can say is just congrats on being yourself in this. There's just one thing that we can hear from your bio and from the way that we've had conversations before. You're just yourself, and that's how you like to do business. And I feel like the audience can connect to that. Everyone is craving right now to be that. So hats off to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's just go into what we talked about before we started recording the interview, which is just a really important point about today and why freelancing is relevant today, which is that today it has become cool, but back in the day when you started, it wasn't. So could you tell us how that was back then?
Sure. So I started freelancing almost 22 years ago, and here in Kansas City, there really weren't a lot of freelancers out there. And like many freelancers in the advertising and marketing industry, we end up out on our own, whether by choice or by default. Hence, you either quit or you get fired, right? And we end up out on our own, and we aren't prepared. We know our craft. We're really good at what we do, whether it's writing or design or photography or marketing strategy, what have you. But so many of us didn't go to school and take business classes. You know, we learned our craft. We learned advertising and marketing, but business classes weren't either required or we didn't think we would ever need them. And then we end up out on our own and we don't know what the heck we're doing. And, so I've kind of made it my own personal mission to rectify that over the years, along with recognizing the void, not only in education, but the void in community for freelancers, as well as respect for those who are self-employed. And so that's kind of been my life's mission, if you will, my career mission. It's kind of transformed over the years into that. To help improve the image of the term freelancer. And of course, as you guys probably know, everybody wants to freelance now, right? You know, statistics show that 30% of the US workforce is currently freelancing. And by the year 2027, that's supposed to be over 50%. So we better get them ready.
Yeah, I actually read another study that said the 50% mark would be passed in 2020 already. So we'll see next year. Yeah. We'll see next year whether we'll like anywhere between next year and 2027, we'll definitely pass that mark.
Yes.
Absolutely. Definitely. So, you said it was freelancers back then did not have any respect. So why?
Well, I think the term in and of itself, comes from a bad place. Unfortunately, freelancers in the past used to be viewed as just those who couldn't find a job. Somebody who was a slacker, who sat at home in their pajamas, eating bonbons, watching Jerry Springer, and that's not always the case. Many of us want to be career freelancers. Many of us are super professional and good at what we do. And that doesn't mean that we can't find a job. Maybe we don't want to work for anybody else. Maybe we want to be our own boss. And so just over the years, I think the term is getting a better image, but it still kind of comes with that negative connotation that collectively, I think people like you guys and myself and many others out there are trying to, change around that perception.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably lots of our listeners are now wondering, so what is it that you teach everyone now? What is it? What are these important lessons that you need to know, and those things, those business things that you should be knowing? But before we go into those, could you tell how you started, how you evolved, your story?
Sure. Yeah, so I went to school for advertising. I got my degree in journalism with an emphasis in advertising. I always knew I wanted to be in advertising and on the creative side, and I ended up as a copywriter. I had two excellent internships while I was in school, and I got out and I was looking for a job and really, really wanted something on the agency side and couldn't find it. And so I ended up on the corporate side working in a corporate marketing department for a fashion department store. And finally got my big break, moved over to the agency side. And then, like I said, like many of us, I lost my job and went out on my own. And I was like, all right, so I'm not finding what I want on the agency side, which, side note, I didn't even realize until many years later, it very well could have been because I was young and female. And this was at a time where we were coming out of the Mad Men era. And the reason I say this is because there's a prolific male creative director in town who told me many years later, yeah, I think subconsciously we didn't want to hire young females because all you were going to do is run off, get married, and have kids. I was like, can I make that decision for myself?
Yeah.
So,
hi, my name is Peggy Olson.
Yeah, right. So essentially I was like, well, screw you guys. I'm going to go do my own thing. And I knew I was talented. I knew I had the smarts. And so I sat down one day and I said, all right, if I'm going to be serious about this and this is going to be my career, what do I need to do about that? And without even thinking twice, I sat down and I wrote a business plan and I wrote a marketing plan and I set goals and off I went. And it's been almost 22 years and no regrets, no looking back whatsoever.
That is great. So you wrote a business plan. How did you get that idea?
I did. It just seemed like a no-brainer to me. You're going to be running a business. You should have a business plan. And of course, I wasn't trained in how to do that. So I had to do some research and thank goodness for the internet, right? And I figured it out and wrote one, and it's kind of guided my purpose this entire way. So
that is awesome. Yeah, I think everyone who first hears of a business plan by someone who is a fan of business plans, I know other people who are like, screw the business plan, you don't need a business plan, just get going. But everyone else is like, what is a business plan? How to write a business plan? What do I need?
It can't hurt anything. It helps you frame your mind around things and helps you find focus. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest shifts and biggest lessons that will help you, dear listeners and dear audience, become successful. Think of yourself as a business. So is that what you also teach now, having it made your mission to help others learn what isn't taught in school?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, started getting asked by the local colleges and universities every year to come in and give a little 1-hour presentation on freelancing. And it dawned on me just a few years back, and I was like, this needs to be taught in school. I am only barely scratching the surface in my 1-hour presentation. Why don't we make this a semester-long course? And long story short, I ended up at the Art Institute, which is actually world renowned here in Kansas City. Who knew? But I ended up there at the art school, which has no business classes, or at the time didn't have any. And I've now been teaching there. The course that I created, it's Freelancing 101. It's how do you position yourself? How do you market yourself? Promote yourself? Brand yourself? How do you find clients? How do you price your services? And then even, the basics of getting a business set up. Do you get incorporated? What do you do about taxes and health insurance? And, oh gosh, how do you put together an estimate and an invoice? And, contracts, scary, but let's make them not scary, and because they're so essential. We talk about deposits and what to do when clients don't pay. We talk about really useful tools, technology tools that can help make their lives easier. And then, of course, we write business plans and we write marketing plans in the class too. So essentially, these young artists are super prepared and ready to go if and when their time comes to freelance.
Wow, that is amazing. That is great. So how are your students doing? What's the journey that your students go through? Probably in the beginning, a lot of overwhelm is what I'm thinking, but tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Well, sure. I think, again, especially for the creative soul, some of this stuff is really unique. And we're talking to people who don't have both sides of the brain working. You're either left brain or right brain, and so I try to make it very palatable for them. And we have fun in the process. We joke a lot. And so it's not as scary as it could potentially be. So yeah, I think they come in a little scared, but I think they leave super empowered and ready to go. Some of them start freelancing, like moonlighting on the side while they're still in school. I encourage them not to go full-time freelance right out of school. I do feel like they should go hone their craft a little bit more from people who can teach them their craft. But yeah, if and when the time comes, that they will certainly be prepared. And I say if, the time will always come in our industry. You'll either do something on the side as a moonlighter or you will be full-time freelance at some point. So it's best to be prepared.
Absolutely. So how long do you think it takes someone starting out, honing their craft, and the craft in our experience is never the problem. People are usually really good at what they do. There's only a very small percentage that fails just because they offer something they're not good at. But
Right.
you can basically offer, if you're even remotely good at one thing, go for it and offer that, because people will pay you money for it. That's a guaranteed thing.
Yeah.
The rest of the stuff is the big stuff. So how long would you say it takes a beginner who is learning their craft, honing their craft, has some things down from this point to get from this point to the point where they've got it all? They've got like their offers, they've figured out the deposits, they've figured out how to get their clients, they've figured out their pricing, all that. How long do you think that takes?
I think it depends on the person. I think everybody's going to be different. Is somebody a fast learner or are they not? Are they super motivated or are they not? I think it's totally going to depend. If we're talking about a student who, graduates and then goes and gets a full-time job, say at an ad agency or something, I would give them a good year or two to perfect their craft. Because there are some things, just little idiosyncrasies that are so important to learn that just aren't taught in school or aren't picked up in school. But once they're ready to launch, again, is it somebody who, will sit there and get trained morning, noon, and night, 24/7, or is it somebody who just, sets aside an hour a week to work on their business? It totally depends.
Hmm. Okay, I see. But is it doable, say, in a year, if you really put your effort into it after the point where your skill is where you want it to be, you feel like you're good at something, you're confident, you know that you can perform, and now you go into full-time freelancing. Is it doable in a year
Well,
to
sure.
get there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as long as you've got the motivation and the determination, I think anything is possible.
Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds good. So, what were your biggest failures in your journey? What are the things where you were like, "Oh, I really effed that one up," or biggest the biggest lessons you learned?
Sure. Well, I would say number one is client relationships. You are your own boss, which is great. You don't have to report to anybody, which is great. However, there are still going to be challenges when it comes to certain clients. And again, that's something we're not taught. People skills and how to deal with especially difficult clients or pain in the ass clients. And something that I got burned on early on, and I know many freelancers do, is what happens when the client doesn't want to pay you? And this can come for a multitude of reasons, right? Did they not like the work? They didn't end up using the work because of something on their end. The project got killed, or I don't know, just it can happen for a variety of reasons. Well, what can you do to ensure that you get paid. And, now I know all of those strategies, between, having open, honest dialogue and conversations, and explaining to them, not only presenting them with a contract, but explaining to them, hey, this protects both parties, it lines out expectations. It explains to them that they are paying for a service and not a product. And, I like to use the analogy of, say you go to a new hair salon and get your hair done, and you don't like what the stylist is doing. You may ask her to change it, right? But maybe it still doesn't end up right. And you think to yourself, oh gosh, I'm never coming back to this person. I'm, never going to refer them to anybody. But when you walk out the door, you still pay your bill, and it's the same concept. We are in a service providing business, not a product providing business. And I think that distinction is very, very important, and something to explain to clients up front, so they know they're paying for your time, your skill, your experience, not necessarily the end all be all product. If they end up not using it, that's on them. Hopefully both parties were very proactive, going into it. Hopefully the freelancer shows their creative samples up front. Hopefully the client asks for them, or they do their research behind the scenes and looks at their website or their portfolio site. So it's, little things like that, people think, oh gosh, I'm a great people person, I'll never have problems getting paid. And sure enough, they do. It may be 20 years down the road, but there are just some other people in the world who don't understand how business works. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so
anyway. Yeah. Could you go into that a little more? What do you do? What do you do if you have set up a contract and then you thought everything was going well, and in the end, the client doesn't pay you? What's the strategy you teach people?
So, give them a few months, ask them, maybe something else is going on behind the scenes, like for instance, I had a client whose parent passed away and I had no idea, well, something like that, just tell me. And I totally understand, take your time, you can pay me when you get a chance, to wrap your head back around things. But otherwise, if there's no communication, if your client just falls off the face of the earth and you send them, reminder invoices, maybe 1 month out, 2 months out, 3 months out, your invoice should say, in big bold red letters, past due, and, you're legally entitled to charge a late fee. In most states, it's 1.5%. It's not a lot, but it's the principle. And so you can tack that on to every invoice. Also, make sure that that's noted in your estimate and in your contract, so the client is well aware that that is a possibility that's coming. So 1, 2, 3 months out, and the client's still not responding, you can try snail mail and get a registered receipt, and see if they actually receive the mail, or do they, hit return to sender. You can call on the phone. I've known freelancers who have gone to businesses and actually sat in their lobbies until they got paid. But you hope you don't have to go to collections or turn things over to collections. You hope you don't have to go to court or small claims court. My best piece of advice is to get an attorney. Have an attorney make sure that your contract is basically foolproof, and that the client won't have a leg to stand on. Usually what I have found, what works is just simply, if they're not paying for whatever reason, whether they're communicating with you or not, just have the attorney send what I like to call a nasty gram, and they just kind of say a sweet little reminder, hey, so sorry that project didn't work out, but if you remember in this contract, here it is highlighted, you said that you're going to pay for their services no matter what. So do you want to pay the bill now, or do you want to see me in court? And that usually, solves everything. So,
yeah. How much should people be paying an attorney for their services? What's a good price range?
Again, it's going to vary by the attorney, how many years experience they have, how good they are, how busy they are. Do they specialize in small businesses and freelancers? I know there's an attorney here in town whom I highly recommend, and I think he charges like $225 an hour. But again, cost of living here in Kansas City is going to be different from San Francisco or from New York. So things may be very, very different. So I would very much keep that in mind when looking at attorneys' prices.
Okay. For those in our audience who are in Kansas City, would you mind sharing the name of that attorney?
Oh, sure. It's Chris Brown, and he's with Venture Legal. I believe the website is venturelegalkc.com, KC like Kansas City.com.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Okay, that's some really important information right there. How to deal with troubles with your client. So, I mean, hopefully it doesn't have to get to a point where you're past the project and then the problems surface. What can you do in advance of finishing a project during working with the clients? How do you identify some red flags of things not going well, or where you could put in some extra communication or some extra work that would maybe reel things back in so that it doesn't have to get to the point where they don't want to pay you?
Sure. Well, initially up front, a huge red flag is somebody who doesn't want to pay your deposit or even sign your contract. That's a huge red flag. And then you just have to trust your gut on this. Is it, a large corporation that you're working with that is most likely going to be trustworthy, or is it a small mom and pop startup that probably doesn't have the cash flow? So kind of watch that. Once you're in the middle of a project, see how the communication goes. Do you have lined out in your estimate or in your contract, hey, I will get X, Y, and Z done, provided that you, client, give me the proper materials by, this date. And here's what happens if you don't give me the materials by this date, well, then my deadline is going to have to be moved as well. So it's just a matter of open, honest communication. If the client knows they're not going to be able to hit that deadline, then they need to be able to tell you that. And of course, same goes for a freelancer. If something comes up on your side, you need to be able to tell the client. I think that's just going to solve not all your problems, but most of your problems if everybody is open and honest and communicative throughout the entire process. Now, if you find you're at a point where the client is getting antsy, or they're starting to think, oh, I don't know if I like this or not. Just, you get to a point where you kind of can sense that, are they not super responsive anymore? Are they not excited to talk to you anymore? You can kind of get a sense. And so sit them down and talk to them and say, hey, listen, I want you to be happy. What can I do to make that happen? Is it a matter of revising X, Y, and Z, or do I need to start over? Maybe we need to rethink the entire strategy here. But, at the end of the day, you've got, hopefully, in your estimate, you've told them how many rounds of revisions that you're willing to give, that fall within that estimate. Hopefully, you also have a line in your contract that talks about scope creep. This happens to a lot of people. Oh yeah, we decided to go in a completely different direction. Oh, okay, well then I need to go and revise the estimate because you're creeping on my scope.
So scope creep, the definition of that, whoever doesn't know what scope creep is, it's if the project kind of grows in a way where your work grows in a way that wasn't discussed earlier, or the project, as you said, moves in a different direction. And then new kinds of work are all of a sudden required on your end, which is the point at which you should be revising the contract and probably sending a new contract and rediscussing what the scope of work will be going forward. How do you explain that to a client if they ask what is scope creep?
Well, I think what you just said was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you just kind of tell them, these things can happen. Let's make sure that our I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And if it comes upon that time, where you are finding that the scope is being creeped upon, you can just say, hey, listen, this feels like we're going in a completely different direction. Let's talk about this, and let's talk about that estimate. I'm happy to do the work, but this is going to take longer than I initially expected. And I think that's fair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you an advocate of sharing the hours that you actually took to complete the work, and charging based on the hour, or charging based on the project?
That's an excellent question. So it took me 20 years to change my mindset on that, because for the longest time I'm like, oh, I charge an hourly rate, and here's what that consists of, it's not just, so I'm a writer by trade, and it's not just the time where I'm actually writing, but it's actually meeting with the client and doing the research and interviews and doing the concepting and brainstorming behind the scenes, and then the writing, and then the proofing and the editing and the revisions, blah, 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 right? I list all that out. And I got to a point where now, as a senior level writer, my hourly rate is quite up there. And I was getting compared to somebody who was right out of school, who was charging maybe $25 an hour, if that. Mm-hmm. And people were coming to me saying, well, why should I charge your rates when I can get the same thing for this low rate? I'm like, well, it's not the same thing. You're comparing apples to oranges, right? Mm-hmm. And, for me, I bring so much more talent and experience, and hopefully will get you better results than this person. And just by looking at the hourly rate, you may think they're cheaper, but in the long run, I may be able to get the project done quicker and end up being cheaper in the long run and get you better results. So yeah, it took me a long time to shift my mindset on that. And so now I give a project rate, and I feel like that goes over much better. Now, truth be told, in the back of my head, when I'm figuring out that project rate, I'm thinking, how many hours is it going to take me, based upon what I feel like I am worth, by the hour. But there's this adage out there that says something like, when you pay me for 30 minutes of my time, you're not paying me for the time that it took to work on this project. You're paying me for all the schooling and the training and the experience that got me to this point. And I find that to be very, very prolific. And so, yeah, now I preach and teach and speak all things charge project rates.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. So how do you calculate a project rate? This is a super practical lesson for everyone. I feel like this is the most practical of all interviews that we've done so far. So is it okay that we go that route? If there's anything else that you want to share,
Sure.
Feel free to just change the direction of the conversation. But since we're going in this direction, I'd love to dig deeper on these really essential practical things that will help everyone out.
Yeah, and again, I think it's going to vary by, who we're talking about. Are we talking about a graphic designer, a writer? Are we talking about somebody who does really intense marketing strategy? It's all going to vary, but for the most part, when you're figuring out that rate, yes, figure out how many hours it's going to take you to do the project. Figure out what it's worth to the client. What is the value that you bring? For example, if you are a designer or an illustrator and you put together a logo for a client, well, just because it took you, 10, 15 hours, to get that done, doesn't mean it's not worth more. A logo is an essential part of a business that's going to be used on every single piece from here on out, right? So I feel like that comes with a higher price tag than just, a 10-hour project, a typical 10-hour project. So you have to figure the value, the usage. Is it going to be used in one place or in multiple places? What was the other thing I was going to say? Now I'm blanking.
We were talking about how to calculate the hours. So first, how many hours is it going to take you? And then next, what is it worth to the client as well?
What it's worth. Well, and I think too, if you do what I do and basically use your hourly rate to figure out that project rate, there's so many different ways to get to that rate. Sure, there are these online calculators that you can go to figure out your salary, or there's these fancy worksheets that you can figure out, for your budget, where you can line item different things. Okay, I need to earn X amount of money in order to pay, my rent or my mortgage or my utilities and my insurance and blah, 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 right? You figure out all these things. However, that's a great starting point, but it's missing out on so many different things that need to come into consideration, such as how much experience do you have? How much schooling and training do you have? How talented are you? Are you winning awards for your work or are you not? How much in demand are you? Is your phone ringing off the hook or is it not? Can you command higher prices because you're in demand? And then, of course, again, cost of living. Do you live in a very affordable city or do you not? Because if you look online and they say, oh yeah, the average going rate for a copywriter is XYZ, that's great. Is that San Francisco prices or is that Kansas City prices?
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally different. So you have to take all of these things into consideration when figuring out your pricing. And I feel, unfortunately, many coaches or many online guides completely miss out on that factor. So important.
Mhm. Mhm. What are what are the things that or I'm actually trying to get to a point and see whether you agree with me on this one. If you're really good at managing clients and building on client relationships, how much do you think that affects pricing? Because if we take the two extremes, one freelancer is the one who kind of touches up on whenever they finish something, but doesn't really communicate much with the client. If the client raises an issue, they kind of react to it, but the client doesn't really feel safe. And yeah, okay, they got the work done, but they had to, like, the client had to be really active. Or on the other side, we have this freelancer who gives updates whenever necessary. Whenever there is a red flag, they kind of say, hi, let's sit down together. They really nurture that client relationship as well, and maybe even try to provide some extra value wherever possible, and so on and so forth. How much do you think that affects the price that you're able to charge?
Well, I think it definitely has an effect on it. How much is a different story. How, to me, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, how much extra time would it, be to put in those added value features or value added features? Is it, are we talking, is it just, a quick hit here and there, or is it, let's dig deep and let me hold your hand throughout the entire time? Because I feel like, it is a value added service. And I do think you can charge more for it. It's just a matter of how much.
What would you call that? I've heard some people call it project management, or oh, there was another word. Um, it's not coming to me right now, but
Okay.
would you list that as an extra item that you would add to your package price?
You can. Yeah, absolutely. I think some clients may feel that that is kind of a given. But in other situations, I mean, they may have a project manager on staff, or,
Mhm.
in the case of working with a virtual agency like I do now, we've got a freelance project manager who helps guide the whole agency. So it works out really well in that capacity. But again, totally depends on the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really important point, actually, because whenever I've had client troubles, it was because their project management wasn't very good.
Mhm.
In advance, they told me we have a dedicated person who's going to take care of this. They're going to be giving you very detailed briefings, um, and this is going to be the scope of the work, and we defined it really well. And then all that was left was for me to get guidance on like the exact details of things. So the nitty gritty, and that didn't come very well because that person who was in charge wasn't really good at marketing at all, so they knew nothing. They kind of were like, so what do we do? Should we I don't know, should we go this way? Oh no, wait, actually I changed my mind. I think we should go that way. And then I had to pop in and say, okay, so I strongly advise you to go this direction because the way the project is going, and so on and so forth. So I was bringing in my expertise, and I let the client, in one specific case, I let the client know, so we're going over time and out of scope right here.
Yeah.
Let me just bring that to your attention right now. I'm going to have to charge you extra for it. I'm going to deduct that from the retainer that we have because I was working on an hourly basis with them. And they were completely fine with it. But it is something that has to be like clients have to be educated on that and kind of
Yes.
trained in a way how you work.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, how much do you think, how much do you think clients need to be trained in order to work well with you? How much
A lot.
difference is there?
A lot. We talk about how freelancers need training, on how to run a business. But I think clients also need training and education on how to work with freelancers and how to work with funders. There's a lot missing. Some clients, and again, it depends on who it is, but some clients have no clue even where to start. Or some clients are like, oh my God, you're giving me a contract, you're asking for a deposit, that's unheard of. Well, no, it's not, so I think there's a huge learning curve, and some people are really open to learning and others unfortunately are not. Let me give you an example. There's a really large, well-known, good ad agency locally here who I had not done work for many, many years on purpose. I did not knock on their door because way back when I had done a project for them and it got killed within, I don't know, the first half of the project. So I went ahead and sent my bill as they told me to do. And it took almost 4 months to get paid, maybe $125. They were like, oh, sorry, we're not going to pay you until we get paid by our client. I'm like, no, that's not my problem. You are one of the largest agencies in town. You have this money sitting around. Is that what you would also tell your Visa bill when it comes due, or your utility company? Oh, wait, we haven't been paid by our client. Sorry. So I was like, okay, well, that's really crappy practice. I don't really want to work with them anymore. And lo and behold, say 10, 15 years later, they come knocking on my door and they said, hey, we have this rush project coming up. It's not today, it's coming up in 2 weeks. Will you be available? Can you do this for us? And I said, sure. And of course, in the back of my head, I'm like, I remember you, and I remember how you treat freelancers. So now again, granted, this is a completely different person I'm working with, but so I sent over my estimate and she writes back, she says, this looks great, doesn't sign the estimate, red flag. And I said, okay, great. I'm glad that, but it's written, it's in writing that she approved. Great. Okay. So I said, okay, well, now here's my working agreement. Don't call it a contract. That's scary. Right. So here's my working agreement. And here's my request for deposit and invoice. And she comes back to me. She goes, well, we don't sign freelancer contracts and we don't pay freelance deposits. Again, huge red flags, right? And I thought, okay, the deposit maybe I can let slide. This is supposed to be a rush project, that's fine. But I'm a little worried about the contract. And again, just kind of in the way she said it, it was very demeaning. Like, you're nothing. You're not a business person. You're not a business owner. And she goes, will you sign our contract? I said, oh, well, I'm not answering that question until I take a look at it. Let me read it. My dad was an attorney, he taught me well. You don't, agree to anything until you read it. And I'm so glad I did. It was 6 pages long. Now, granted, most of it was, very usual stuff. Who owns the work product, non-disclosure, non-compete, all that jazz. Okay, fine. No big deal. But one line was hidden in the middle of this whole thing. And this one line essentially said, speaking from the agency, we won't pay you until 30 days after we get paid by our client. 30 days. There it is. Ding, ding, ding. I know. And I was like, oh, hell no. And, so I sent it over to my attorney, Chris Brown. And I said, hey, am I wrong thinking that this is a huge red flag? He's like, absolutely. And so he advised me to go back. And this was so great. He advised me how to phrase it as well. And he said, oh, just simply say, as part of the negotiation process, I would like to change this one line from what it currently says to that you guys will pay me within 30 days of receiving my invoice. And she said, oh, sure, no problem. Well, what do you mean, no problem? Shouldn't that be in there anyway?
Yeah.
Anyway. And so anyway, I got it done. I signed, they changed the contract. I signed it. And funny story, I ended up getting paid within 10 days. But it told me that they have this practice to take advantage of freelancers. They're holding on to money so they can earn interest in their bank accounts where you're the ones who really need it, right? With the freelancers who deal with the episodic income and we never know when our next paycheck is coming in, I thought that was really, really shitty. And so I asked the gal, I said, hey, can you put me in touch with somebody in the legal department? We need to have a little chat. And she's like, oh, yeah, I'll get you that information. And she never got me the information.
Well.
Which is fine. But it just, it completely reinforced my opinion that there's so much training to be had and that some people are open and willing to be trained and some people aren't. Now, who do you want to work with? Right?
Exactly. So that is a perfect point, actually, a perfect question. as we are wrapping up. So before we do, are there any last things, or is there one last thing that you would like to share with the audience? Again, we have people who are thinking about starting freelancing, who's just recently started freelancing, who are moonlighting, and then we've also got people in the audience who've been at it for a couple of years. So anything that kind of pops in your mind for someone in our audience now that you think they
like a piece of advice?
Yes.
I would I would empower people and encourage them to learn everything there is to running their own business, and also encourage them to, how do I put this lightly, grow a pair and essentially like be confident in yourself, be confident in your services, get paid what you're worth. Don't let anybody take advantage of you. Don't let them disrespect you. Don't let them not pay you for your work. Your work has value and you have value. So just, I would encourage others to be badass, not just me being badass. I want other people to be badass. And I think collectively, the better off we will all be if we all adhere to these global industry standards and practices.
And I'm sure we'll get there. I'm sure that as the freelance workforce grows, be it part-time or full-time, power to the freelancers. We will take over the world. Woo!
Woo! Yes.
Awesome. Wonderful. So there is something that we discussed that you would offer the audience, right?
Sure.
So would you share with them what that is?
So I have a freebie if anybody would like it. I have put together a PDF of 7 steps to rock your solo business. And you can easily get a hold of it if you want to go to my website at juliecortez.com, Cortez with an S at the end, and just fill out the contact form and tell me where you saw me and how you heard about it, and I will send you the PDF.
That is great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Mark now.
Great. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. So yeah, remember to get your hands on that PDF, juliecortez.com. Thank you so much. And while today's conversation might be coming to a close, do remember to check out all the other great interviews in the series for more valuable insights and content. For now, thank you, Julia. Thank you, Julie, and rock on, everyone.
Yeah. Rock on. Yes.